Obstruction in plain sight. Let's play hardball. Could Donald Trump's tweeting cost him his presidency? Could Robert Mueller find that Trump's relentless threatening and bullying of possible witnesses constitutes criminal obstruction of justice? Does the fact that Trump does so outrageously and in broad daylight constitute any kind of defense? Is this all Trump's lawyer has the guy to defend him, that he obstructs in plain sight? Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews. In incidents that occurred privately behind closed doors, there are also actions that the president has taken in plain sight that could bolster a potential obstruction case. Earlier today, the New York Times reported, quote, Mueller is scrutinizing tweets and negative statements from the president about Attorney General Jeff Sessions and the former FBI Director James Comey. According to 3 people briefed on the matter, Mueller is examining whether the actions add up to attempts to obstruct the investigation by both intimidating witnesses and pressuring senior law enforcement officials to tamp down the inquiry. Reacting to the development, Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani was dismissive, telling the New York Times, if you're going to obstruct justice, you do it quietly and secretly, not in public. However, the Times reveals that privately some of the lawyers have expressed concern that Mr. Mueller will stitch together several episodes, encounters, and pieces of evidence like the tweets to build a case. Specifically, quote, the fact that they are scrutinizing his actions under a section of the United States Code titled tampering with a witness, victim, or an informant raised concerns for his lawyers about Mr. Trump's exposure in the investigation. The report also makes clear that the special counsel still wants to question the president. However, as Bloomberg reported this week, Trump is demanding that he isn't asked questions about obstruction of justice under a proposal the president's legal team submitted to Mueller. Joining me right now is Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He sits on the House Intelligence Committee, and Joyce Vance, a former U.S. attorney. Thank you all. Let's start with Peter. Peter, the New York Times report is fascinating because it points out that just because you do something in public doesn't mean it's legal or make you innocent. You can do all sides of people, kill people in public. It's still murder. Your thoughts?
Well, it is striking that, the things that President Trump has said on Twitter and said in public interviews, said, out loud, had they been in secret memos that were unearthed by subpoenas and revealed by investigators, people would say, aha, this is interesting. This is evidence perhaps of perhaps a conduct or a pattern of conduct that might be questionable or even criminal. The fact he does it out loud has kind of desensitized the whole thing. Everybody's kind of gotten used to it. That's the way he operates. There's nothing hidden here. He's very out front about what he thinks about Jeff Sessions. He's very out front about what he thinks about Jim Comey. So it's interesting that Robert Mueller is now taking a look at this and trying to weave it together and see how it all fits into a pattern. No single tweet, no single statement may be in and of itself obstruction, but the question is whether if you add it all up, does that add up to something like witness tampering or some other impeding of this investigation?
Joyce, your view on this, the fact that he's done things like saying, demanding, well, we've all heard about it, so it became public, demanding the loyalty of James Comey before he fired, demanded that he go light or let Michael Flynn, as National Security Director, off the hook. Or he said, tell the public I'm not being targeted here. All those demands we've subsequently learned he was doing, they could potentially be, well, I'm asking you, obstruction of justice.
Peter's exactly right. Trump doing this in broad daylight has desensitized the public, but that desensitization won't carry over to Bob Mueller. He'll look at Trump's conduct, he'll look at his state of mind, and then within this very specific statutory framework that exists under law, he'll decide whether there's enough evidence to prove some form of obstruction. And that's why all of this conduct matters, Chris. These tweets are perhaps a window into Trump's state of mind. If they're tweets that can be attributed to him personally, they run through this course of conduct from the firing of Jim Comey to the efforts to humiliate Jeff Sessions into resigning, on through the false explanation for the Trump Towers meeting, that entire course of conduct. So yes, Mueller will definitely try to stitch all of this together and see if obstruction emerges at the end.
Does the fact that he tweets at dawn, apparently reads the paper and then starts tweeting, that it's done so impulsively and out of apparent passion, does that add to the question of motive?
You know, I think it does. I think what happens here is you get a sense of his true state of mind. And that's the most difficult part of an obstruction case, because the government has to prove that you acted with an intent to keep a witness from showing up to testify, or with an intent to destroy evidence, or any of the other numbers of types of conduct that are prohibited. So to the extent, you know, it's usually the eyes that are the window to the soul. Here with the president, it's his tweets.
Let me get Congressman Swalwell. It seems to me, watching this, and we've all been watching this in plain sight, these tweets, which go to everybody, he's constantly pounding the Attorney General. How come you've recused yourself? Well, it's almost like, take charge of the case and get me out of it. It just seems like he's constantly pounding Jeff Sessions to intervene on his behalf, pull back on the investigation, and yank Robert Mueller out of his seat.
And there's no Twitter client privilege in the law, so that's not going to save him. And you know, I've heard this before when I was a prosecutor. Oh, who would be so stupid to say something, you know, that everyone could see? Well,
that's what Rudy, by the way, is saying.
Yeah,
Rudy says he must be innocent of these charges because he did them openly.
Yeah, the prisons aren't filled with Rhodes Scholars. They're filled with people who make a lot of mistakes that we're able to find. But right now, I think he feels emboldened because he doesn't see
anyone. Rhodes Scholars that aren't so smart, but go ahead. I mean,
he doesn't see anyone in Congress who is standing up to him, and so I think he feels emboldened to keep moving forward, because he knows ultimately this goes to the Judiciary Committee. And when you look at that, everything they can to be his fixers in Congress, he thinks, well, I'm not going to pay a penalty because they're just going to let me keep doing it. They're not going to hold me accountable. I think that changes in November, because I think the American people want to check on this president. They see him as a wrecking ball, and they just want to be protected.
Well, meanwhile, in the Cohen case, the New York Times here again is reporting that the audio tape of the president's conversation with Cohen shows the president telling his fixer lawyer, that would be Cohen, to pay in cash to silence Playboy model Karen McDougal. Let's listen again to that clip, which was provided to CNN by Cohen lawyer Lanny Davis.
I'm all over that. And I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be...
Listen, what financing?
We'll have to pay you. So,
I'll pay the cash.
No. I got...
No. Anyway, Trump's legal team has advanced an interpretation. I love the way they talk of what it said on the tape and the transcript they circulate, as the Times reports. In the White House version, that would be the Trump version, as per Rudy Giuliani, Mr. Trump told Mr. Cohen, don't pay in cash, and then says check. You can't hear the word don't, by the way. But according to the Times, Mr. Trump's team manufactured a dialogue to make it more favorable for their client. Repeated screenings of the tape do not clearly reveal Mr. Trump saying the words don't pay with, an omission that would entirely change the meaning of his comment. Let me get back to Peter Baker of the Times. Peter, you guys did a study, apparently a due diligence study of that tape. You can't find the word don't. It looks to me like that transcript they put out was Nixonian. Nixon didn't want the tapes out. Nixon put out a transcript. Did they have a little guidebook at the White House? Do what Nixon did. It seems to be their pattern. Peter.
Well, it's a lot like the Helsinki thing just a week or so ago, but he said he meant wouldn't rather than would, right? Is it don't pay in cash or pay in cash? These are fairly important distinctions. And the question is, a tape that's not 100% clear, but as we've listened to it again and again, we don't hear the word don't. Pretty important distinction. We'll see whether the special counsel hears it the same way, and whether
what did you make of the fact that Rudy Giuliani, on behalf of Trump, and obviously they talked about it, decided not to release the same? They had access to the same tape. They refused to release the tape. They released a transcript, which they typed up themselves. I mean, that's what Nixon did. Remember the Judge Stennis solution? We're going to let the judge. I mean, that's anything exactly but let the evidence out. They don't. It seems like the White House doesn't want us to see the evidence, which is the tape.
Transcripts, of course, are always controlled by the person who does the transcribing, and any tape can be, modified in a way that make it sound like something that really isn't what was being said, right? And so that's why the original tape is the most important piece of evidence in any kind of circumstance like this, and why any defendant, anybody on the receiving end of an investigation like President Trump is, would prefer to control the information as it comes out and present it in the most favorable light.
Well, there's another significant development in that Michael Cohen investigation. The Wall Street Journal is today reporting that Alan Weisselberg, a longtime financial gatekeeper for President Trump, has been subpoenaed to testify before a federal grand jury in the criminal probe. As the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization, Weisselberg was once described by a person close to the company as the most senior person in the Trump Organization that's not a Trump, and for years prepared Mr. Trump's tax returns, according to one former Trump Organization employee. Weisselberg has also been in the news recently because Michael Cohen mentioned his name in the conversation he recorded with Trump in September 2016 when he discussed a payment to silence Playboy model Karen McDougal. Here's that.
I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David, so that I'm going to do that right away. I've actually come up and I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up with funding. Yes, and it's all the stuff.
Let me go to Joyce on that. Do you think they've got the tax returns? I mean, they're going after the guy who prepared the tax returns. It seems to me they're close to having the documents. Your thoughts?
First thing you get as a prosecutor in a white-collar case like this is the tax returns. Now they've got the accountant who can explain them. It's starting to look a little bit like the Al Capone case, right? When the bookkeeper can come in and say, I gave them money and this is how they used it. This could be a very important witness for the Southern District of New York case.
This is what the great attorney and professor of law, tax law, Mort Kaplan, did for Bobby Kennedy at the IRS back then. They went after the bad guys, the mafia, with this kind of work. Let me ask you one legal question. If Trump was talking about corporate money, Trump corporation money, and Weisselberg handles that. If that money was being used to pay off somebody on the eve of an election, that would seem to be more like the Bunny Mellon case. It's not his own money. He's paying the campaign expense. It's not his own contribution under Buckley Vallejo. He's allowed to do that. It's corporate money. Talk about that, Judge.
So it sounds like you don't really need to have anyone explain the law to you here. I mean, this is a very well-established doctrinal line that says that you can't fungibly exchange corporate money with your personal money because that becomes income to you. So Trump could have theoretically opened himself up to a whole species of tax crimes if this money is being intermingled and not reported. That's independent of any campaign finance law violations that might be lurking here.
I just wonder why he brings in his chief financial officer of his corporation to help with some personal cash matter.
Yeah, if we're arguing over cash or check, he has us in the direction he wants us in because we're not focused on the bigger picture, which is that the president of the United States was a shadowy operator. He had a fixer. That's not how any honorable president would act, a Republican or a Democrat. And so I think we should take an MRI.
You think this will surprise his people?
Probably not, but I think he needs an MRI to his finances, his campaign, and his personal dealings. Otherwise, we don't know who he's drawing us closer to.
Peter Baker, I still think we're going to get to this in the next segment, but the manner in which this guy gets away with his behavior, he comes to the presidency with 3 marriages. No, we can get used to that. He said what he did on the Access Hollywood tape, the way he talks. All this stuff about it's how he avoided getting sexually transmitted diseases. That was his Vietnam. I mean, any one of these would have staggered any other politician running for any office, and yet Trump walks right through it.
Well, he does, and part of the way I think he walks right through it is he doesn't look back. He's not ashamed of it. He doesn't express regret or remorse. He doesn't act like he's done anything wrong. He, in fact, returns fire. It's all about the fake media. It's all about the witch hunt prosecutors. It's all about the loser Democrats. And he doesn't exhibit the way most politicians of both parties have in the past when they've been caught doing something that would be something controversial or offensive. He doesn't take it back. He doesn't act as if he's done anything wrong. So I think that that brazen approach moving forward has worked for him so far. But he's never had anybody like Bob Mueller on his tail before, and we'll have to see where that ends up.
And we'll see how his confrontation goes with the law. Anyway, thank you, Peter Baker, U.S. Congressman Eric Swalwell of California, and Joyce Vance. Coming up, could another president get away with what Donald Trump does all the time? He's banning reporters from press events, threatens security clearance to take away security clearances of his critics. He attacks his own Justice Department. At what point does America say, enough, buddy? Also, with just 100 days until the midterms, Trump is in the Midwest today, where in some states his approval numbers are underwater. Can he settle the unease among voters his party needs in November? And the deadline to reunite migrant families is only hours away now, but more than 700 families still don't know when or if they'll see their loved ones again. The Hardball Roundtable weighs in on that. Plus, Ivanka and Jared, the Romanoff family members, are digging in for the long haul. They're not headed back to New York anytime soon. We'll think what we think of that. Finally, let me finish tonight with Trump. Watch, you won't like it. This is Hardball, where the action is.
If President Obama did what President Trump did in Helsinki, I'd be peeling you off the Capitol ceiling. Please.
It's a good line. Welcome back to Hardball. That was New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez at yesterday's Senate Foreign Relations hearing, expressing a sentiment that could apply to many of President Trump's recent, any actions. Yesterday, the White House banned a CNN reporter from a press event because, according to the White House, she was too persistent in her questioning of the president. I'd never get in there. I'm always persistent. Earlier in the day, the president took steps to yank security clearances from former intelligence officials who have criticized his behavior toward Russia, an overt act of political retribution. He's attacked his own Justice Department. Yesterday, in an official statement, his national security advisor called the legitimate investigation by Robert Mueller a witch hunt. They're all saying it now. Meanwhile, President Trump has praised North Korea's Kim Jong-un. And he threatened military action against Iran, warning that they will suffer consequences, the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. He's like the Phantom of the Opera. It's the kind of behavior that would earn any other president universal condemnation. However, Trump's Republican allies continue to stand by their man. For more, I'm joined by author and political commentator Ron Reagan. Michael Steele, of course, former chairman of the RNC. Gentlemen, thank you for this. I mean, this is going to be hitting a barn door with a beach ball and a paddle. I don't know how you can. Why, if I'll say this about Barack Obama, who I did respect a lot, admired a lot. If he had had 3 marriages, he talked about women like that. The president we have now talked about women in Access Hollywood. If he'd done anything, anytime Trump does anything, he would have been keelhauled or whatever. He wouldn't be there. Ron Reagan.
Yes, you're absolutely right. No previous president could have gotten away with, even a tenth of the things that Donald Trump has. But the reason, I think, is that his base, which is about a third of the electorate or so, they really aren't in touch with reality. And the most important thing to them is, I think, he seems to hate the same people that they hate. And that includes all 3 of us, by the way. If we're angry about something Donald Trump did, Donald Trump must be doing something right as far as they're concerned. It's really the real Trump derangement syndrome. That's not with us, it's with them.
Let's take one small particle of Donald Trump's MO. Yeah. My Vietnam, he told Howard Stern, was avoiding sexually transmitted diseases during Vietnam. that was his. I mean, is that a campaign pitch? Who does that impress?
Yeah, I don't know how many people you will win over with that, but it is a creative argument, I guess. Look, I think Ron's got it right. I mean, the bottom line is Trump is in the safe space because he has a base that is with him regardless, and again, don't like the same people he doesn't like. And that safe space includes a Congress, House and Senate, that is not disposed to do anything to disrupt that flow because they themselves are afraid of that base. So when they're looking at their congressional districts and they're seeing 70 to 90% approval for the president, they're not going to get on the wrong side.
Let me challenge this. Ron, you said he hates what they hate. Okay. Your father said that Gorbachev, you said your father, I hate to use your father, but it's a great example. He was a popular, successful president. He said that Gorbachev, the head of the then Soviet Union, trust but verify. Trump says to Putin, can I sit on your lap? I mean, I'm sorry. There's a difference.
But if you think about Trump's base, and we're talking about Trump's base, and that's really in a way what's driving all this.
But they don't like Putin's base.
No, they do like Putin. If you look at the polls, Putin's popularity has gone way up. I swear to you that if it were left just up to Donald Trump's base, they would elect Vladimir Putin as president of the United States over virtually anybody with a D after their name. And I'm not kidding you.
Well, what comes first, their love of Putin or Trump's love of Putin?
Well, I think it goes hand in hand. If Trump seems to love Putin, then they'll love Putin too.
Well, how about Kim Jong-un, that guy? I mean, how far can you stretch the fact if you like Trump, you go along with all of his crap, and it is crap, and I don't understand. There's something here we haven't gotten to. How's this guy get to say, Simon says, if he says it, then it's true? This has never been true before.
I think a real good reason for that, and the answer to the question goes to the fact that they still see him as the guy who's fighting at the core for the things that they want to see done. They're pushing back on the people that they feel they've been wronged by in the establishment of the party. They're pushing back. They stay with him because he's putting forward an agenda.
Okay, let's talk about women. There are three guys, but just a little projection here, right? Here's a guy that we know paid off one porn star, $150,000. Right. He's paying off another one indirectly through the National Enquirer, another $150,000. Or they're talking. He's doing it on tape. We're seeing this kind of guy, this sleaze going on, engaging in these kind of extramarital affairs, and then paying them off to keep them quiet. And he doesn't pay a price of 1 point in the polls.
Well, ask those 52% of educated white women who voted for him in 2016 why they did, because that was exactly what happened. So
that's what in our religion we call a dispensation. How does he get this dispensation? What bishop says you can eat meat on Friday, you can skip church today?
But the bishop who does that, the congregation likes, even though that's not the norm.
Ron, who gave him a dispensation where he gets to do anything he wants to, everybody else is held accountable? The husbands of these women who like him and put up with him, they don't get the dispensation for this kind of stuff.
How about the fathers of the teenage girls, the teenage beauty contestants, where he bragged on radio about sneaking into their dressing rooms in order to see them naked? Imagine if Barack Obama had been caught on tape saying something about that. Imagine what Fox News would be doing about that.
I'm thinking of Groucho Marx for some reason. Anyway, meanwhile, according to the New York Times, Trump's tax cut, which was supposed to be a winning issue for elected Republicans in 2018, is pushing the federal deficit to $1 trillion run. I remember not a million years ago that Republicans were for free trade. They believed trade was the benefit of everyone. They did have a sense of fiscal responsibility. They at least talked it. This guy doesn't even talk the talk. He doesn't even do it. He does whatever he wants, and they don't care.
No, they don't care. I mean, listen to some of his speeches at these rallies. This sort of incoherent gibberish, these word salads, that are just these stock phrases. They're still shouting "lock her up" at these rallies.
Who's the her? Does it matter anymore? Does it even matter anymore who the her is?
No.
No.
Insert name here.
Yeah. Well, let's see. There's no limit to this, you say, Ron. This is the news for people who are progressives and independents, that there's nothing that Trump can do. He can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, literally, well, not literally, figuratively, and they'll still love him.
It's going to get worse. It is going to get worse. Mark my words, it will get worse and worse.
Let's also look at why that is, and that's because right now the Democrats are not offering a strong alternative voice to compete against this narrative.
That's my favorite question. Who's the leader of the Democratic Party?
And so,
I know, we'll get to that in the next 2 years. We'll get to that. By the way, I think everybody's going out for a second beer right now after listening to you, Ron Reagan. They're not too happy with the world we've described. The other word, the guy they think is awful can get away with being even awfuler. Anyway, thank you, Ron Reagan. We have to do this once in a while. This palate cleaner. Thank you, Michael Steele. Up next, some of Trump's policies are creating headwinds for Republicans heading into the 2018 midterm. He's costing some people some problems. Will his base turn out to support him despite his controversial trade war and his ongoing bromance with Vladimir Putin? I think we're already there. Anyway, this is Hardball, where the action is. Welcome back to Harbor. We're roughly 100 days out now from the midterm elections in November, and the president's acting nervous. Just in the past few days, he's reversed himself on a number of issues. He delayed his invitation to Russian President Vladimir Putin until 2019. He backed down on his demand for a border wall money, about $5 billion in the upcoming funding bill. And he promised to bail out farmers hurt by his tariff war. Well, today, Trump traveled to 2 Midwestern states where he tried to convince voters that his tough talk on tariffs, for example, will work out. It could be a tough sell. In Iowa, for example, prices for soybeans, pork, and other major farm goods have tumbled. According to the Morning Consult poll, as of June, 50% of Iowa voters disapprove of the president's performance now. And just yesterday, a new NBC Marist poll showed President Trump underwater, well below 50 in 3 Midwestern states. 36% of voters in both Michigan and Wisconsin approve of the president. That's all, while 38% of voters in Minnesota approve, so not exactly 50%. For more, I'm joined by Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com. So some of those states, like Michigan, Wisconsin, he carried them. He carried Iowa. Yeah. It's not doing so well right now. Who's telling Trump that you got to fix this thing with tariffs? you got a problem. Just an example there. You're hurting real people with real product.
It's probably the governors, right? Like Scott Walker is probably calling through every single person possible saying, look, if you want me to keep this job, if you want me to keep doing what I'm doing in this state by pushing your policies and some voter suppression, you're going to need to do something about this. He is killing these guys at the local level, because even though Trump can go to a rally and have 20,000 people show up and cheer, he is dragging down the Republicans in that state who can't explain his policies, and that's what's hurting him across the Midwest.
Yeah, I've been saying for a long time the Democrats need a leader to beat Trump. They don't need a leader on this stuff.
Right.
Tell me why it's different than having to have an opponent.
Well, so here's the thing. You know, Trump, if you're going against Donald Trump, all you need is somebody who can fight with him directly. But his policies, right, his policies are more dangerous than him. His policies aren't charismatic. You mean all politics is local?
Exactly. I mean, it hits people where they are.
Exactly. It hits people where they are.
They can vote no. They don't have to vote for somebody else. They just vote against Trump.
Exactly. They vote against his policies. They vote against the guys who like his policies. Third shifts, right? I called some friends in Indiana. I called some friends in Ohio. Third shifts of steel mills are getting shut down over this. Okay, you know, even if he does...
What's that, the graveyard?
Yeah, that's the graveyard.
11 to 7?
That's the I got to pay for my kids' tuition in the fall shift, and it's happening because of these steel tariffs. So even if he's got this $12 billion to help the farmers, if the steel tariffs keep going, that's going to damage steel workers and everybody who works with steel workers across the Midwest.
How long does he have to get a readjustment where he can prove that he did the right thing? He squeezed these other countries into readjusting. Has he got a couple months?
I don't think he's got
July, it'll be August in a week.
He's basically got maybe until Labor Day.
Well, Governor John Kasich, no fan of the president. He's a Republican, but no fan of Trump. Slammed President Trump's $12 billion bailout of farmers as terrible policy. Here's John Kasich.
He's resorted to more farm welfare. You know, farmers don't want aid, they want trade. That's what they want. Now it's been compounded by actually furthering the debt of this country, spending as much as $12 billion providing aid to make up for the damage that's been done by the continuing tariff.
Governor Kasich later suggested that the aid package was akin to buying the votes of farmers. What do you make of that?
Well, it's true. It's true. And the problem is Mike DeWine is a big Trump supporter. Ohio's Republican Party is a very pro-Trump party. But if this policy can't be explained, and if people in Northeast Ohio and Southern Ohio are being hurt by these policies, you know, Kasich can say what he wants now, but they can't explain this. They can't justify.
Well, he's tough.
Yeah, he's tough. And also, he's still well-loved. He's the guy who sort of stood up to him, even if he's sort of distanced from the party. The president can't find a way to say adding these tariffs and lowering your prices now and making it difficult for you heading into the fall when it's time to do harvest season, when you got to buy school clothes, can't explain.
How does he get away with saying I'm not demanding the wall right now, because the wall's a big part of his anti-immigration line? Because all he's got to do is say it's going to get made. Remember, Trump's been lying by saying that the wall was already starting to be built, right, when we all know it hasn't. The wall has always been symbolic. It's symbolic about people who are worried about immigration, people who are racist, people who just feel that they need to do something about illegal immigration. So he can back off from this now. As long as he resurrects it at some point, he'll be fine with his base. Thank you, Jason Johnson. An exuberant performance. Up next, President Trump is shouting no collusion from the rooftops, but holding back on obstruction. Does this uncustomary restraint mean he's worried about you? Bet he won't take any questions about obstruction. Plus, today, there's a headline about reuniting migrant families with their children. Will the Trump administration be able to get those families back together in time? And how much damage has already been done? I'd say a lot. You're watching Hardball, Women in the Suburbs.
Tweeting is like a typewriter. When I put it out, you put it immediately on your show. They're well crafted. I was always a good student. I'm like a person that does well with that kind of thing. And I doubt I'd be here if it weren't for social media, to be honest with you. When somebody says something about me, I'm able to go bing, 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 and I take care of it. The other way, I'd never be able to get the word out. How did Rome get him to talk like that? I'm a really good student. I'm well-crafted. Welcome back to Hardball. President Trump's nonstop Twitter feed has been a staple, of course, of his life and presidency. He's called it a direct line to the people. However, as the New York Times reported, those public comments are now causing Trump's lawyers serious concern. Robert Mueller is investigating whether some of the president's tweets were part of an effort to intimidate witnesses or seek to end the whole investigation by Robert Mueller. For more, I'm joined by the Hardball Roundtable and Vivian Salon is White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Gabe DeBenedetti is national correspondent for the New York Magazine. Ruth Marcus, of course, is deputy editorial page editor for the Washington Post. I want to start with Vivian. Rudy Giuliani's defense of Trump is it can't be against the law because he does it so openly. He tweets it.
Well, you said it was the staple of his presidency. It's the bane of the existence of his lawyers, that's for sure. And this is the problem right now, is we're talking about obstruction of justice and whether Twitter is a factor in Mueller's consideration. When we're talking about firing Comey, you have people on both sides coming out and saying, was there justification for it? Was that obstruction of justice? Is that a criminal offense? Is that impeachable? With Twitter, the problem is that no one can really control the president, and so he has the potential to go rogue. And when it comes to legal matters, this is obviously something that concerns his lawyers, where it can be so sensitive, and one word can completely just trigger any kind of suspicion that the president was acting intentionally. And so it's a very sensitive
What I like about it is it's impulsive. He gets up at 6:30, reads the paper, and starts tweeting. It's him. Ruth?
Yeah, you know, the lawyers have this phrase, excited utterance, and it makes it more admissible in court. His tweets, bing, 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 are his excited utterances.
What did you get in the LSATs? What, 100 or what? You pull this stuff out. It's so impressive.
Really good. I would like to say on television, my LSATs were really high.
I assume they were. Go ahead. And you came out with that. What did you call? What was the phrase, the legal term you said?
Excited utterance.
Well, tell me about excited utterance.
But I'm excited to tell you about obstruction of justice because, look, it would be probably unprecedented for a prosecutor to make a case solely on obstruction case based solely on Twitter. We've never seen that. But that's not what I think Mueller would be thinking about here if you were to argue.
Okay, let's take a couple categories.
It's a tapestry, right? It's tweets plus. And it's the other things. It's without
like
the other things,
charge.
the tweets aren't criminal.
Dave, what about that? See, let's take the case where we nail this down. The stuff he says about Jeff Sessions. I want you recused yourself. I hate you for it. I want you out of here. Why are you still there? Can't you do it again? Can't you take control of this case and throw it out the window? Can't you protect me? Can't you do it, Jeff? He's doing it all the time. He's intimidating the guy. An overall charge of justice in his case.
Right. A lot of the argument that we seem to be hearing from the White House and from people associated with it these days is this has all been reported. This is all old news. Therefore, it can't be part of the legal case. Well, I'm not the lawyer on this panel, but I'm pretty sure that's not how the law works. It doesn't have to be behind closed doors and secret for years in order for it to be illegal. Yeah. So if you're pressuring someone, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's behind closed doors, that is later reported in public, I don't think Mueller's going to really care which is which. And, you know, in this report today, you saw the White House lawyers or people close to the White House saying essentially, well, we're worried that Mueller's going to try and stitch it all together and build a narrative. That's called building a case. That's how this stuff works.
You don't have to go to law school to have that exactly right.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's called building a case.
Thank you. From the LSAT genius. Today at the deadline, is a deadline, by the way, this is serious business for the Trump administration to reunite those migrant families that were separated under the president's zero-tolerance crackdown. According to most recent updates, the administration was able to reunite just about 1,400 children. 700 remain separated, 700. However, roughly 400 families can't be reunited because the parents have already been deported or willingly left the country without their kids. According to court documents filed by the ACLU, there have been roughly 27 cases of parents being misled by the government into signing away their rights to reunification. What do you make of that? Actually, they didn't know this. They signed away their children.
Well, there are reports, of course, though, that these people didn't know in many cases that that's what they were doing. And I think what we have to take from all of this, of course...
who got the children, the custody of the children? Those foster families?
Well, either that or it was some nonprofit.
Are they wards of the state?
Yes, absolutely, or nonprofits that were taking charge of these families. But I think the overall story here, of course, has to remain on the hundreds of children that are not with their parents right now or not with their families. And the reality is that this is another example of how the administration has completely botched this, because you still have agencies that aren't talking to each other, and they set this deadline. They're still missing this deadline for hundreds of families.
Let me try to throw the ball in the air. Suppose there had not been anybody blowing the whistle on this, Vivian. Suppose it hadn't been stopped. They had gone through with their plans, separation, detention. It seems to me they never really had a plan. If they had had complete control of their plan, they never had a plan to reunite.
Well, that's the problem, and also that they had to have any kind of sweeping policy in this case where every single case on a case-by-case basis offers very unique circumstances. And so this is what they're realizing now and having to go through the process. It's taking a very long time, and these court deadlines obviously not helping the situation and making things that has stakes much higher, where they say, well, this child came in with adult supervision guardians but not the parents, and the parents might be in this state, or this child came alone, and they're saying that a lot of children came with smugglers.
Why did somebody tell the president with zero tolerance this was going to happen, Ruth? Nobody told him.
Because their argument was, well, this will help deter, and they just
without all the other consequences considered.
Anybody should have known the consequences. They didn't plan for the consequences. This is not an administration, I think it's fair to say, known for its careful planning. This was on careful planning with children involved.
Speaking of families, now to the Romanovs again. On his swing to the Midwest today, President Trump was joined by his senior advisor, Ivanka Trump. Earlier today, Axios reported that the president's daughter, that would be Ivanka, and her husband, Jared Kushner, don't plan on heading home to New York anytime soon. Friends of the couple tell the news site that they are now preparing to stay in D.C. as long as the president does, meaning they'll outlast almost everyone in the West Wing. Ruth?
Well,
the Romanovs are ruling, as always. The expert on the Middle East. She's the expert on prison or whatever. It's unbelievable.
No, she's the expert on families and caring about families and women. And so you can see the really good implications and effects of that.
Why are they given all this power? I mean, Hillary Clinton was a graduate of Yale Law. Whatever you thought of the way she handled health care, she had the prerequisites to take the responsibility. These people are just family members. That's their
The Trump
claim.
organization is a family business. This is a family business. It's always been a family business. They have no business being in the White House. But he doesn't know that. He doesn't care.
Well, he may care when they get indictments of his son, a couple of his sons, you know?
Yeah, but this is, you know,
for the Trump Tower dealing and stuff like that with the Russians.
But this is another reflection, of course, of the fact that the White House has struggled to get mainline Republicans in to work for them, at least at the top level. So, you know, I'm not going to pretend to speak to the motivations internally of Ivanka and Jared Kushner, but the reality is that he has struggled to get senior advisors, and, you know, we should dispel with this fiction at this point, if we haven't already, that they're moderating forces in any way. They do make him feel comfortable.
But most importantly, yes, exactly. Ivanka Trump, most importantly, is an expert in Donald Trump. And I think that most of his advisors agree. First of all, she stepped into the role that traditionally the First Lady does, where she travels with him a lot. She holds these
so
events.
this is Trump's like an NBA star. There's only feel comfortable if he has his entourage.
He's close with his family. He's close with his children, and he's kind of cut off from some of them. And she's the one person who kind of keeps him level.
Here's my theory. A lot of this is going to come to a head. We'll have a reckoning when one of his family members is indicted. I think that's the serious bit. Then he has to decide whether to pardon or to let one of his kids be hauled off to jail. The roundtable's taking with us. And up next, these three will tell me something I don't know. Tonight, sources tell NBC News that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was blindsided by President Trump's tweet threatening large sanctions against Turkey for detaining an American pastor. Secretary Pompeo has been involved in delicate negotiations trying to get Andrew Craig Brunson released. The pastor's been in jail for 18 months on what the U.S. claims are false charges connected to a failed coup against Turkey's President Erdogan. This is not the first time in recent days that Pompeo has been surprised by White House tweets on foreign policy. Two State Department officials confirmed to NBC News that he wasn't aware Trump invited Putin to a summit in D.C. Do you believe that? We'll be right back. We're back with a Hardball Roundtable. Vivian, tell me something I don't know.
Donald Trump's favorite subject, economic growth. Tomorrow, second quarter GDP coming out. Economists agree that it's going to be a good one, that figures can be anywhere from 4% to maybe even as high as 5%. But a lot of that is boosted by preemptive activity on tariffs, so let's see what happens.
$1 trillion deficit, that helps.
Let's see what happens.
Go ahead, Gabe.
Well, while all of us have been focused on D.C., there's been a trio of Western Democratic governors who've been really amping up their 2020 activity. John Hickenlooper from Colorado, who recently went to Iowa, is in New Hampshire tonight meeting with state party leaders. Jay Inslee from Washington was in Iowa recently, and the most 2020 forward of them all, Steve Bullock from Montana, is in New Hampshire next month, and I've recently been told that he's going to Iowa later this week. He'll be in Dubuque tomorrow. And
the backdrop, cut of his jib, we'll see.
And the backdrop, Democrats have never nominated a Western.
25 candidates, it looks like, Susan.
Vivian, scoop me, and I'm not nimble enough to come up with an alternative. President Trump is going to take a lot of credit for these good numbers. Don't believe him. It's a lot of people who bought things because they're worried about his tariffs, and a lot of false growth from tax cuts juicing the economy that it's going to then slow down. Don't buy it.
Here's the thing, with the economy booming like it is now, at least in GDP terms, and low unemployment rates among minorities and all that good news, he's still in the low 40s. And what's he going to be when we have our recession in 2 years?
Yeah, and by the way, wages flat.
I know. Well, anyway, thank you. Can I see my prompter? Thank you, Vivian Salama. Gabe the Benedetti. The Benedetti.
There you go.
Like, it's easy. And Ruth Marcus with the high IQ. When we return, let me finish tonight with Trump Watch. Your parents are watching. You're watching hard. Trump Watch, Thursday, July 26, 2018. Special counsel Robert Mueller is reported to be investigating the president's tweets now as part of an effort to obstruct justice. President Trump's lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani, retorts that tweets cannot be part of an obstruction of justice case because they are public acts. Quote, if you're going to obstruct justice, Giuliani said, you do it quietly and secretly, not in public. Really? We all, and that includes Rudy, know that President Trump is quite willing to carry out often what others try to hide in broad daylight. It is, to use a crime-fighting term, his MO, his known method of operation. What others dare not, he dares not only to do, but to broadcast, making a racket as part of Trump's weaponry. It's his way of striking fear in rivals and underlings alike. It makes clear sense that Robert Mueller's team is looking at Trump's tweets, his almost daily fusillade of misleading statements, public attacks, possible pardon offers to potential witnesses. Talk about a pattern of obstruction. It's all been part of a broad effort from the beginning to interfere with the investigation. There was his intimidation of FBI Director James Comey, Trump's pushing Comey to profess his personal loyalty to him, his pushing Comey to let his National Security Director Michael Flynn off the hook. Then his demand that Comey announce publicly that he, Donald Trump, was not under investigation. Finally, his firing of Comey for not playing ball. Want more? How about Trump's continual threats and intimidation of Attorney General Jeff Sessions, his haranguing of him to get Sessions to end his recusal of himself in the Mueller probe, his demand that Sessions take charge of the probe personally so that he can